Welcome, everyone. Wow, I am so excited to be here with all of you today as we kick off the 2022 Social Innovation Summit series of events. By way of introduction, for those of you who I don't know, my name is Olivia Allen, and I am incredibly proud to have the privilege of being the Executive Vice President and Head of Events at Landmark Ventures. I would like to extend a very heartfelt welcome to our cherished Social Innovation Summit community. And for those of you who are perhaps getting to know us for the first time, thank you so much for being here with us today. We are genuinely excited to get to know you. Now, for our new attendees, a little bit about the Social Innovation Summit. We are a platform designed to elevate groundbreaking ideas and innovative leaders who are making a difference and changing the world for better. Now, as part of the Social Innovation Summit's carefully curated year-round calendar events, we are so honored to partner with the best organizations in the world. We try to amplify conversations, partnerships, and solutions around some of the biggest issues facing our communities today. Now, as mentioned, the Social Innovation Summit hosts a number of events throughout the year. And this year, I'd be remiss not to mention that our flagship summit will be returning in person in Washington, D.C. on June 7th through the 8th. Today, as mentioned, is kicking off our series of events, and I am so honored to share this moment with our longtime and incredible partners at Comcast NBCUniversal. Today is really, really important. We are discussing the critical nature of investing in leaders of color and how we can advance racial equity through social entrepreneurship. Now, to facilitate this critical discussion, we are welcoming Gwyneth Gall, who is the Associate Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Community Impact at Comcast NBCUniversal, Cheryl Dorsey, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Echoing Green, and Damon Packwood, who is the Creator and Executive Director of Gameheads, and also Mel Ochoa, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Landmark Ventures. This group of people are going to dive into a conversation focused on promising partnerships and initiatives supporting entrepreneurs of color and social enterprise work. Today is a solutions-oriented conversation that will explore strategies and approaches for advancing a more inclusive economy that strengthens the workforce of tomorrow. A bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to turn it over. I'm so excited for the discussion. We've sent all of you in attendance our digital brochure. It has the agenda and our speaker bios, and we are taking questions from the audience that our speakers will answer towards the end of the discussion. So please submit your questions to the Zoom Q&A function throughout the event. Now, let's get to our program. I am so pleased to welcome our moderator and the Chief Operating Officer, my colleague and friend at Landmark Ventures, Mel Ochoa.
Thank you, Olivia. I really appreciate it. Welcome, everybody at home watching this. Really glad you are here with us. And thank you to our wonderful guests. Don't forget to submit your questions in the chat function. But man, I have been in the Olympics. I have gone down the rabbit hole. And so it's really nice just to talk to anybody right now outside of quads and 1260s and half pipes and everything. So it is really nice to get together with other people and have a conversation. I always think of these webinars or these conversations, these moderated times together as a good dinner conversation. You know that question, who would you want to invite to dinner? And I would absolutely want to invite Cheryl, Gwyneth, and Damon to dinner. We would be having cereal because I'm not a great cook, but other than that, it would be a great conversation. Cheryl, you are not only an industry leader when it comes to social entrepreneurship, but you've helped create the industry over decades. I have nothing but deep respect for you. Gwyneth, you have such deep experience in philanthropy over your career that you are obviously one of the top national experts on the intersection between funding and community partnership, especially now with your investment portfolio at Comcast. And I just saw your digital equity commercial last night during the Olympics, and your team is doing great work. It was beautiful. And then Damon, I lived in Oakland for quite some time. I love Oakland. I've been wanting to meet you for a while. You were in the game, no pun intended, but pun sort of intended. I want to look witty. Not only building an enterprise, working hard on the front lines, but building an ecosystem for the next generation to have more pathways to participation. And that's, I think, why we're all doing this, to make sure that those pathways to participation are there for the next generation. So you are doing the good work. So I'm really happy that we're having this dinner conversation, and pick your cereal, pick your favorite cereal. Before we jump into the discussion, I want to highlight the incredible connection and partnership between these three organizations. Comcast is an early investor in Echoing Green's Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund in 2021, and Gameheads, a 2016 Echoing Green Fellow, whose work truly encapsulates the focus and mission of the fund. So you three have already been at the table having dinner together. We're just adding our voices to it. So let's kick off the discussion. We have a great time together over the next hour. Reminder to all those watching, submit your questions in the chat, and we will get to those sort of at the bottom of the hour. Cheryl, would love to start with you, bring you into the conversation first. And I'm actually going to read this because these numbers are incredible. I actually didn't know this, and I feel like I'm on top of most things. So you just announced a 3-year racial equity philanthropic fund, as I just mentioned. But here's the incredible part. By 2023, your commitment is to launch and scale 500 social enterprises, improve social innovation on-ramps for 5,000 emerging leaders, and engage 10,000 corporate employees. Can you share more about the fund? How did it start, and where is it heading?
Yes, so thank you, Mel, for facilitating and hosting this dinner party. I feel like I'm at the cool kids table, so appreciate it. Longtime fan of yours, Mel, as I first met you as you began your social innovation journey.
Absolutely.
And I'm grateful to be here with my EG family, Damon and Gwyneth, who I'm sitting here today because of Gwyneth's leadership at Comcast to help make all of this possible. So before I jump into the Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund, just want to start with two quick things. I always like to start these panels with a land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you all today from the land of the Nacotchtanks, which means, comes from the word Anaquashatanik, which is a town of traders. And in this moment, when we're talking about equity, racial equity, sort of using land acknowledgement as a really important justice and decolonial practice, is a reminder of how we all need to walk the walk, talk the talk every single day. So thank you for giving the space to do that. And then secondly, you're going to hear me throughout this hour actually use the term social innovation, which we define at Echoing Green as a process, right? A process of developing and deploying effective solutions to challenging and systemic social and environmental issues in support of social progress. It's a broader concept, but also includes the work of social entrepreneurs. So I just wanted to do some expectation setting on that, because the field of social innovation, which is now tipped into movement building territory, this is how fields and movements grow as the terminology shifts and grows. So that said, thank you for acknowledging the fund that we started at Echoing Green, the Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund, REPF. It was launched last June of 2020, after two things: the murder of Mr. Floyd on May 25th, 2020, as well as sort of the middle of a global pandemic that we all have lived through and continue to live through, but one that has disproportionately impacted communities of color and marginalized communities. So it really was, all of us had a reckoning, a racial reckoning, and how were we going to respond individually and organizationally to this historic confluence of events. And Echoing Green, that has a deep belief in and commitment to the movement of social innovation, said, we recognize how powerful a tool for transformational social change, social innovation can be. And in an increasingly complex world with more and more existential problems, we said we've got to be unapologetic about raising our hand to stand alongside things like rights-based movements, community organizing, advocacy efforts, all of these incredibly important strategies for driving transformational social change. We believe that this was social innovation's moment to raise its hand and stand up and show how it could be an important additional tool and strategy to drive social progress, especially as it relates to dismantling oppressive forces, including structural racism. So we set a goal. We said, okay, we're going to try to gather $50 million to try to lever up the work that we do. this has been so successful because of leaders like Gwyneth and Comcast. We actually very quickly got to the 50 million and have now raised the ceiling to 75 million because we believe we can do more good. And you laid out the 3 pillars of the work, Mel. It's all about the who, the what, and the how. So this is all about leaders like Damon. We need more talent on the field to tackle and solve these structural inequities. So we were like, we do great work. We've known Damon since he started out with Damons, but we need more Damons out there. So we agreed to lever up the number of social entrepreneurs that we identified, vetted, and supported, getting them into the work of social innovation. Second piece was recognizing, social innovation as a field had to really work on its movement building bona fides. And we all know that movements thrive because of the engagement and mobilization of young people. Social innovation has become a clarion call for next generation leaders who have recognized that people with gray hair like me have messed a lot of this stuff up, and we got to get them into the game with their energy, their passion, and their commitment. So some of the work that we had been doing on 5 HBCU campuses, we decided to lever up that work. And imagine 5,000 young folks who were given permission, right? Creating a permission structure to follow in the footsteps of a Damon Packwood and others, opening up a whole new front line in the fight for racial equity. And then last but not least, how do we work with corporate leaders like Gwyneth and you, Mel, this notion that we talk a lot about allyship in this world. It far too often becomes far too performative. It doesn't have much meat to it. But imagine if you could upskill thousands and thousands of business leaders that sit in extraordinary companies like Comcast to make them true partners in the fight for racial equity. That's what social innovation does well as an alliance-based model for change, right? Crowding us all in. So we're not talking about sort of zero sum opportunities, but win-win opportunities about how do we all come together to work towards a shared goal. And a lot of the work that Echoing Green has done to wrap supports around entrepreneurs like Damon, getting smart people in the room to help another really smart person in the room who's trying to change the world, and doing the kind of shared skill-based volunteering and connectivity that's required to do this work at scale. All of that was wrapped into the Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund. And we're just thrilled to have Comcast as an anchor partner and do more to help and support leading lights like Damon.
That's great. Yes, we need more Damons. How do we do that? We need maybe it's a science route of replicating Damon, but you're taking the social innovation route of finding other people like Damon and training them up. So there are a couple pathways there. What I love about this conversation is that we at Landmark and Social Innovation Summit, we're hearing this more and more of the commitments that were made 2 years ago when you started this fund, and now seeing how things have mapped out. And really here, there's a huge anchor that's been placed. And so seeing that outcome is really inspiring, as we know that a lot of places have made commitments and not followed through. Comcast, Echoing Green, and then also people like Damon. This is now a commitment that has been followed through, and we're seeing the benefits of it. We're reaping the rewards of it, and it's so cool to see. So really, really nice to hear that. Gwyneth, from your perspective, Comcast NBCUniversal, you were an early investor, as Cheryl mentioned, in the Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund. As an investor, can you talk about your commitment to supporting entrepreneurs of color and communities of color and the social enterprise work that Cheryl mentioned? And then also, how does supporting this fund tie into Comcast's broader equity commitment? Because I know you're doing a lot of things. You are busy.
We are. We are. And, first and foremost, thank you, Mel, and to the Social Innovation for hosting this important conversation. It's being able to have platforms like this that can be really transformative. So thank you to that. And thank you for Cheryl and Damon for taking the time to join us. So just to take a quick step back, right? So the history of Comcast actually starts with an entrepreneur founder. It's deep in the company's DNA to really believe that entrepreneurs spark innovation that make essential contributions to our communities as well as to our economy. It's why supporting entrepreneurs of color in particular is central to our overall equity strategy. We know that their success is really directly tied to job growth, to community growth, and to economic mobility. It's why we're investing in entrepreneurs through Echoing Green, that we know will support the work of hundreds of social entrepreneurs. And just hearing Cheryl speak gets me so excited, because wheels start turning. I know there's so much more that we can be doing together. So excited to continue to dig in. But I think, as you heard from Cheryl, and as you'll hear from Damon as well, we can't really just fund our way to equity. Entrepreneurs of color not only need funding and resources, but they also need support systems for training, social networks, infrastructure to be able to grow and scale their businesses. I think that's why, in part, we made such a significant and early investment in the Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund, because through the fund, Echoing Green's not only providing just the funding, but also providing that support and training, like Cheryl talked about, for these businesses to be able to grow and to scale. So I think, like Echoing Green, we really believe in a holistic set of supports for entrepreneurs. I think another example of our work, you mentioned we're busy, but through Comcast Rise, which is providing technology, media, marketing, and grant support for small businesses all across the country that are led by individuals of color. And I think also as a media and technology company, we believe in bringing these stories and issues to life through powerful storytelling. And so very proud that in addition to our support of the fund, that we also were supporting a new documentary that was produced by Echoing Green, profiles some really incredible leaders like Damon, a rock star today, and whose entire businesses are really focused on creating a more just future for their communities. I'd say the documentary is really a wonderful portrait of hard work, of setbacks, triumphs, and ultimately real resiliency. It's entitled Unwavering: The Power of Black Innovation, and it's going to be premiered this month across NBC owned and operated stations, which we're super excited about. And I'm thrilled to be able to share a clip of it with all of you now.
Talk to us about Blackness. What does that look like?
Black people have always been innovators. It's in our nature to innovate. It always has been, out of necessity.
Survival innovation is the same thing. Someone just said, let's make it a fancy term.
We've had to cut our own path, but it's hard, so it needs support.
The microaggressions, the overt, the covert racism, all of that can leave a chip on your shoulder, and it can change the way that you show up in this world.
When nobody else believes in a Black leader, usually they're business guys.
There are conversations that you can't have with funders. And so for the first time, it was an opportunity to have an honest conversation. But it came at us watching the murder of so many innocent Black men.
To have people actually tell you that, I want to give you money because I feel guilty. It's like, yo, man, like that's not philanthropy. It's not about guilt. It's about recognizing that we need to even things out.
We are sitting in a moment in which Black people, we're the flavor. But look, we always been the flavor. We know we've always been the flavor. It's just that everybody else is discovering that we're the flavor of this moment.
As someone that's been doing this work, you know that Black lives mattered before George Floyd died.
Black innovation is happening everywhere. It's always happened everywhere. The question is do we have access to capital? Do we have access to social capital? Do we have access to the supports and the larger community of belief that we're worthy of investing?
What does a Black community look like with power and autonomy over its own destiny?
Wow, that is powerful. Thank you, Gwyneth. So just want to remind everybody that you're going to be able to see that across NBC properties very soon. So I'm looking forward to watching that as well. Damon, would love to bring you into the conversation now that you got that wonderful introduction through the documentary. I feel like you're not only a social innovator, but you're a movie star now. You're going to get on a plane down to Hollywood and do a pilot of some sort. I'm excited to see your work. But I want to bring you into the conversation. I love what you said about the guilt aspect about philanthropy and some of that we're seeing now, but also some true deep commitments from people like Gwyneth and NBC or Comcast NBCUniversal, and also Cheryl, who has done a life's work around this mission. So just as a reminder to people in your bio, you were a 2016 Echoing Green Fellow. And your work is exactly the type of work being supported by the Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund. Just so people can have a perspective of game heads, what led you to founding this company? And also, just how is the funding from Echo and Green and the influx of funding for your organization that you received in 2020 helped you scale the organization and welcome more kids into it? It seems like you're really at that phase of building out and scaling and just growing considerably.
Yeah. Hello everybody. Thank you for having me. This is an honor. This is great. I'm glad to be here. When we started the program, the funny thing is the the Bay Area was going through this, very interesting transition period where the tech companies in the Bay Area were really disrupting sort of Black and brown communities and just, general working class communities. I'm a San Francisco native. So I saw it happen in San Francisco. We know it happened in East Palo Alto. And then I had moved to Oakland, and I was kind of fortunate. I lived in downtown Oakland. So there was this sort of tech diversity movement happening in downtown Oakland. And it was like a couple of blocks from my house. So I would like walk up the street and like hang out at these like pop-ups with people and what have you. And, I had spent some time doing video game journalism. I've been an educator for 27 years now. So it wasn't like I didn't know the space. I think at the time I was working on my master's degree in interactive design. And there was this big movement in the East Bay of creating this tech diversity movement to combat the disruption, which is, how about we start training up the next generation so that they can, transition into the tech industry and continue to thrive and live here in the Bay Area. Like, a lot of people think that we were trying to diversify those industries. Our actual interests were the communities. We wanted the students and the young people to be able to stay in their communities and thrive. And then secondary was, these industries need more diverse bodies, right? They need diversity in these industries. And it was interesting. It's actually a really awesome story that I'm like, I hope somebody don't tell this story 100 years from now, call it Hidden Figures 2, because it's probably gonna happen. Like I remember Van Jones was, called us all in a meeting, and
oh wow.
At the time, they thought that I was working on my PhD at UC Berkeley. So they invited me to the meeting, and it was like this secret meeting in San Francisco. And I'm like, I'm actually, I am working on my PhD in computer science. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, where's this meeting at? I think Chris Tucker called in to the meeting, and Prince they were communicating with Prince during the meeting. And it was like, folks from the Kapor Center was there, and Kimberly Bryant from Black Girls Code was there, and the brothers from Hidden Genius Project was there, and Zakiya Harris, and all these rock stars.
Wow, that is a power lunch.
Yeah, so I think, fast forward a couple of years, I realized that the big push was on computer science. And I was like, computer science is hard. Computer science requires resources in STEM. And if you don't have those resources in public education, and generationally, you're going to struggle with computer science. So I was like, well, what's the next best thing? And for me, that was video games. I was like, if there's one thing that, communities of color thrive at, it's culture and art. And so what is the closest thing to culture and art within tech? It's video games. Yeah. And so I had all the data. We knew that the gaming industry was going to have to address its lack of diversity. We knew that video game players were going to be more diverse in the next couple of years, because the census data was showing that we're going to be a minority majority country in a couple of years. We knew that international communities were going to go online, and when they went online, they were going to start playing video games. And that was Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Kenya, Nigeria. We had all this data. Nobody would pay attention to us though, until my wife was like, you should apply to Echo and Green. And I was like, we don't do green jobs. What are you talking about? We don't do green jobs. What are you talking about? She's like, no, they don't, it's not green. I mean, they do some green, but it's not green. You should apply. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. She was like, just apply. Right. So I applied, and I got through the first round, and I was like, hey, I got through the first round.
So then I got through the second round. They were like, hey, we're going to fly you out to New York. I'm like, wait a minute, I haven't won anything and you flying me out to New York? I was like, what is this? So I go to New York and I meet some of the most amazing, a lot of people that's on that documentary, like Deanna, I met, a lot of people in the documentary I met when we were in New York. And I remember I was like, oh, I got to get this fellowship. I was like, I got to get this fellowship. I don't quite know what it is yet, but I got to get it. And they'll tell you, like, I was in the hallway practicing. I wouldn't talk to nobody. I was like really focused. And then I got it. And I remember when I got it, I still didn't get it. And they invite you to this retreat.
Yeah.
I remember Cheryl was like, Damon, Cheryl explained to everybody what it was finally after you got it. And I said, oh, so this is a community of people who like are radicals.
Do big things.
She said, yes. I said, yes, I'm right where I need to be. So anyway, that's a long-winded
story.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, and yeah, community is, I've known a lot of fellows and community is one of the biggest aspects of it, coming together, sharing experiences globally, right? So you're learning from people who are doing things in sub-Saharan Africa and Haiti and, in the US. So that's amazing. One other thing, just while you have a moment, beyond funding, I'm sure just for any entrepreneur, there are a ton of barriers to entry in terms of success. How do you see the current landscape of entrepreneurs of color? Where else do all of us, need to double down on support? Like in the documentary, social capital was mentioned, but there's so many other things that Cheryl and Gwyneth and others really need to know about and be aware of so that entrepreneurs like you are succeeding and those barriers don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. How much time do we have? Obviously the capital is important, but it goes beyond capital. It goes mentorship. When you get to this stage in your career, it's hard to find people that can mentor you or can relate to what you're going through. Networking, best practices. A lot of innovators of color are trying things for the first time. We didn't know anybody doing something similar to what we're doing. And so, we had to just kind of figure it out as we went. A shoulder, spiritual counsel. I don't get an opportunity to tell people about, like, people don't want to hear about what you got to go through. Like, that's the tough part. Like, people don't want to hear, they want to hear the good stories. They don't want to hear about the challenges. It's very rare that people say, I want to know about the legitimate challenges that you're experiencing. That's rare.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to compartmentalize that all the time.
Yeah.
You need to kind of let that out. So it's a lot of things that social innovators, particularly social innovators of color, need.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason I ask that or bring that up is because so many people who are watching, they think it's all about capital and, that capital leading to generational wealth. It is about capital. Absolutely 100%. Put more money into entrepreneurs of color, entrepreneurs anywhere, intrapreneurs, put more money in. But it is all these wraparound support systems that entrepreneurs need and communities need that a lot of people don't always realize. Oh, well, we can help in that way. Sure. Let me make a phone call or shoot an email over to them. So want to make sure that people know that. Cheryl, before we get to some audience Q&A, when you think about the effort to support a broader movement for sustained change, where are you seeing bright spots, particularly in the area of support for diverse founders and leaders? And where are some of the biggest areas of opportunity? Where do we still need to double down?
Great and important question. And I do think that there are bright spots, right? So I think part of, again, I'll go back to the power of social innovation, right? And I think that it's particularly a powerful lens and frame because it centers both innovation and proximity. It really puts the entrepreneur at the center, right? It sort of says, what does Damon need? What does Game Heads need? And I think that this narrative frame around social entrepreneurship has been a really wonderful way of finally centering the entrepreneur and his journey. So I think that's certainly one thing. I also think another bright spot is how corporations are thinking about their approach to CSR in this moment, right? So a lot of the work, and Gwyneth knows this better than all of us, that's sort of this question of alignment, like how do you align the work of your philanthropy with sort of your business operation units, as well as sort of the core value proposition and focus of your business, like getting in alignment and turning that in a way to drive resources and attention to entrepreneurs of color, social entrepreneurs of color, really important. And those are conversations that are happening, and it's translating into action. And again, I think the partnership with Gwyneth and Comcast is a brilliant example of the myriad of resources they bring to bear. I, in particular, in addition to financial support, I think they've done two things really brilliantly. One is they've leveraged their storytelling ability, right? We are able to show the clip around Unwavering, the power of Black innovation, because you've got a company that is world-class and best in class at telling stories. So I think that's a wonderful way of doing what you do best and then applying it to the work of social innovators like Damon. And then I think the last piece, and you all have mentioned this, the power of community building, right? Echoing Green is a community. We are a family. We believe in the power of building power amongst a portfolio of folks. But, you know, Comcast has been able to bring together a broader set of folks that I've met for the first time, and allows us to sort of expand our sphere of concern beyond the Echoing Green community. And again, they're able to set a table given who they are and how they walk through the world. So I think those are a couple of bright spots about how we're all sort of re-examining and rethinking about how can we do things differently to get more things done.
Yeah, great.
And then you asked me, sorry, about like what more needs to be done. And I'm going to pick up what Damon, like these innovators need money, right? You know, Echoing Green, we're our best in class talent spotters. By the time you become a fellow like Damon, we've gone through thousands of social business plans and we select less than 1%. But the fact that we have still found capital disparities between our leaders of color and our white leaders, and then sort of the capital gap that these organizations are experiencing, it's unacceptable. So when I look at Damon, there are probably like 400 innovators in our community that are led by people of color that are working on racial equity. If we had the opportunity to just upsize their budgets, those below $1 million, get them to $1 million. Those between 1 and 5 million, get them up to 5. They could absorb annually $1.5 billion. Think of all the impact we're leaving on the table because we're asking Damon and his team to go out into the world, not fully capitalized to do the work we know they're capable of doing. That's the gap. That's where we need to go. And that's the work we've all got to figure out how to make this marketplace work better for leaders like Damon.
Well said. Well said. So let's open up to some audience questions. Again, for those watching, please continue to submit your questions, but we have a few here. We'd love to, I think this is for everyone, but I would love to start with Gwyneth. What have you learned as you created culturally specific initiatives for entrepreneurs of color? What has worked well and what hasn't? This is from Genesis. Genesis, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're having a great day. So Gwyneth, what have you learned?
Wow, that's a big question. You know, so we I think at Comcast, right, we've been deeply committed to digital equity for many years. And as we think about investing in entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs of color, it is new for our philanthropic commitments and new as we launch initiatives like Comcast Rise. So I would say we are very much still in learning mode and very much in an open-minded, wanting to be our best selves mode. But I think you have to be intentional in making these investments. It's not just about providing support, but it's I think being providing trust, open dialogue, being able to have those open and honest conversations with your grantees, because there are different needs that are emerging, and we have to be able to be responsive. So I would say definitely still in learning mode, but intentionality, I think, is really, really critical.
Yeah, great. Damon, Cheryl, would love your answers. Damon, you're creating culturally specific initiatives in terms of the program that you're developing. What have you learned when it comes to communities of color?
What do you, can you be more specific?
Yeah, I think, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but are there things you're learning that need to be considerations for specific communities over others as you build out a program that is maybe a gateway into the gaming industry, or at least tech at large, et cetera?
Yeah, I think what we've learned over the years is that it's not the training. The training is the easy part. It's the wraparound services that's the most important. And, that's the educational counseling, and access to hardware and software is big because it's very expensive. The video game industry is a luxury industry that requires knowledge of luxury tools. But lately, the thing that's been the most standout is mental health. Mental health services, especially since the pandemic, have been tremendous. And that's kind of like been our major focus the last 2 years, is focusing on our students and our staff's mental health.
Yeah, okay. And Cheryl, what are you learning? You have a broad lens on a lot of social innovators out there.
Yeah, so I think that we're all seeing a couple of things. So I would say through the lens of the pandemic, communities of color in particular have sort of gone back to their roots around the power of mutual aid configurations, right? Sort of long history of communities coming together to survive, to thrive, to support one another. I think we've seen a real resurgence of that during the pandemic. And folks are doing more with less, but they're doing it because of their commitment to and love for communities. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is, again, I drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago around social innovation, but because of its alliance-based nature and focus on sort of problem solving, executing, building, it is a wonderful way to bring historically strange bedfellows to the table to sit down together. No discussion of political ideology, no differentiation. You're just working on a common theme, problem, or issue. And there are a lot of scholars now in this era of sort of democratic backsliding. It's like, we're so tribal at this point. We got to stop talking about the idea. Like, let's just put one foot in front of the other, fill a pothole, solve a problem, work together, and sort of this, think, do, Michael Brown at City Year used to talk about an action tank. Just make the road by walking, do the work. Over time, trust is forged and built, which then creates space to have the more difficult and uncomfortable conversations that we all need to have if we're going to figure out a way to live together in this multiracial society. I hope we can get there, but I think doing some of this work together is one avenue to have those, build those trusted relationships, as you all were saying.
Yeah, and Mel, I would just add to that. I think with trust, there's a few things. When I think about Comcast as a corporate funder, right, we the ability to provide flexible resources and funding to entrepreneurs of color or to leaders of color in general is critical. We know these leaders are A, underfunded than their white counterparts, and B, have far less unrestricted assets than their white counterparts. And so how do we build upon that trust and really ensure that they have the tools, the resources to be successful? And I think as a corporation, our dollars are not always the biggest thing that we can bring to bear, but our platforms, our people, the other resources that we can engage in. And so really, again, kind of being intentional about how do we bring some of our incredible people as mentors, as Damon was talking about, or leveraging our platforms, as Cheryl mentioned, with the documentary. So I think being, again, intentional and bringing multiple resources to bear.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And
yeah, go ahead.
I'll echo that. That's probably been the most exciting thing about the work I've done over the last couple of years, is working with people who I didn't anticipate being allies or being like stakeholders or being a part of our community and having an opportunity. It actually, our support from corporate started with employees who convinced their companies that we were doing good work. And it was a diverse group of people, and some of them even international in Canada and Denmark. So that actually has been my experience as well. And it's been a part of like the social entrepreneurship piece that's been really exciting.
That's so nice to hear. I think it's just a lot more active employee engagement around the issues around us and in our communities. We've definitely seen that over the last couple of years more than ever, and I'm glad you're seeing it as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question here that I think is an interesting one. I'm trying to choose some broad questions that'll help a lot of viewers. This is from an anonymous attendee, so I apologize for not knowing your name, but when embarking on a racial equity conversation with new organizations and contexts, what do you suggest is the key to creating that equitable, quote unquote, equitable dialogue? You know, it seems like it would be sometimes a sensitive conversation when you want to introduce equity into some of the work that you're doing. Gwyneth, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think you probably have the most conversations when you
But you're going to anyways, aren't you?
and bring in a lot of other partners.
You know, so I think you know, when we're thinking about equity and bringing together folks, we need to meet people where they are, I think, and not hold expectations for them to be someplace that they might not be. Create space and an opportunity to have a conversation and a dialogue and create that trust and understanding. I think, you know, we at Comcast, at least, we have an incredible opportunity to set the table, as Cheryl mentioned. And I think we can leverage that ability to convene and bring people together in a really unique way that hopefully can break down some of those barriers, create some trust, and be able to have some of these conversations in an open and honest way.
Yeah, yeah. Damon or Cheryl, again, I don't like the open-ended questions. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you know, introducing equity into the conversations, Damon, especially with your work, you know, you're playing both sides of it. Of you're working in the tech sector, you're working in the gaming industry, so that's just, you know, that's a whole silo in its own. But how do you introduce that equity conversation when you are working with other partners?
Yeah, that's hard. I don't even know that I am an expert at that. That might be a better one for Cheryl. I had a conversation with somebody just this week, actually, about students applying for internship positions and trying to get them to understand the amount of work that a student that comes from a low-income community, the amount of work they have to do to get prepared to be to not only apply, but to be eligible. And how important it is for them to have a good experience throughout the application process, if they get the internship, throughout the internship, but then also like how important it is for like your team to receive cultural competency training, because if you're going to ask them a question, that question should be rooted in, you know, like you should know how to speak to them. You know what I'm saying? And that can be difficult. I have found that the best way to do it is to be polite, to be humble, but also be honest. I think that that's the best thing to do, and to speak to them directly. I know a lot of people that like to speak to everybody else. It's like, go to them directly, like model good behavior, go to them directly and tell them how you feel. Sometimes you'll get good results, but you know, and sometimes you won't, but it's good that that dialogue is happening consistently, because after a while you hope that it creates a trend in people's mindsets.
Yeah.
Look, I think all of this is really good advice from Damon and Gwyneth. I'll add just a couple of things. So I think increasingly, and this goes back to some of the research Echoing Green did with our friends at the Bridge Band Group, where it was increasingly clear for all of us in the world of social impact, to get to more impact, you had to run straight through racial equity, especially in the US context. So I'm just saying, we are all trying to optimize around impact. It is just the strategic, smart, effective thing to do. And I think that's a very powerful argument. I also think people start to spin their wheels because it seems so difficult and hard, saying been folks who are on this journey for years, and there are lots of best practices we already know about. So you don't have to create anything de novo, just learn, and we can share a lot of those best practices of doing the work of social impact through the lens of equity. I also think really grappling with language. I mean, we've all seen how we're weaponizing language at the moment, CRT, other things. But concepts like white supremacy, but just sort of breaking things down and say, well, white supremacy is a socio-political economic system, a very powerful ideology, but it really is about sort of centering whiteness and making people of color deviants from that norm. Like, that's what that means. It's not calling you or you or you a racist or white supremacist, but like literally going back to basics through descriptive educational opportunities to sort of walk through some of these concepts that then allow you to sort of engage. And I do think engagement is hard because it's personal and it's fraught. So whenever it can be facilitated by folks who are really good facilitators, I think that really helps. And then the last thing I always say, and I guess it helps, you and I, David, folks of color saying like, none of us are to blame for what's happening today, but we're all responsible. We're all responsible. So can we just sort of put that aside and let's get back to work? So sort of, again, creating those spaces and opportunity to keep the conversation going, I think is super helpful.
Mm.
Great.
I told you he's going to be better at explaining it to me.
Hard to beat.
So this is a question from Tara. I think this is the Tara up in Hartford, one of our partners. Welcome. Great point about wraparound services. We often hear from entrepreneurs, though, that they receive lots of mentoring and training, but funders and or investors are less willing to provide capital. This is really the heart of our conversation today. So this is a perfect question. This means developing special funds and or philanthropy to provide that financial investment. How do we encourage the investor community to further invest in diverse social entrepreneurs? They often seem to be missing from the conversation. Wow, exactly on point. So I'm not even going to put anyone on the spot. Whoever wants to answer first.
Well, this is something that is very, central to my experience as an entrepreneur. What I will say is providing things like mentorship and support, wraparound services and things like that is capital, because if somebody were to give you funding, you'd have to pay for that, right? So you have to acknowledge that I often tell people, put a dollar sign to that kind of stuff, because that does equal funding. So if somebody says they're going to volunteer and they're mentors, like how many hours would they get paid per hour? Like how much money would they get paid per hour? Put a dollar sign on it so you understand the value of it, right? Because there is value there. Having said that, there is a need for actual capital. And in our experiences, to be frank, I think that probably 95% of the money that we've received has not come from foundations. As a matter of fact, the amount of work that I've had to put into applying the grants versus the amount that I've gotten is insane. And so it is something that, at least on my end, because I'm not on the other side of it that Cheryl's on or that Gwyneth is on, but on my side, it has been extremely difficult to convince foundations that it is important to give us actual capital so that we can, pay our staff or have like healthcare benefits, or there's certain things that we just have to pay for, licenses, insurance, or what have you. That is very, very challenging.
Gwyneth, how do you bring more corporate partners, investors into what you're doing so well on the Comcast side?
We're trying to, for sure. I think there's appetite and some momentum for sure. And I would say, it's not and or when we think about capital, it should be capital versus mentorship or wraparound. It should be both. And so how do we structure it that way? So whether it's through our work at Comcast Rise and providing grants to small businesses, but in addition to that, providing one-on-one mentorship, coaching, resources, so that it's it's the both. How do we think about that in our grant portfolio as well, providing really much needed programmatic support, but also, to Damon's point, how do we provide the resources needed to keep the lights on, to pay health insurance? How do we not be too restricted as funders, and be thoughtful? So I think, it's we can quickly go down the path of it has to be capital or it has to be mentorship, but I think we should be really thinking about it holistically. So those would be my thoughts.
Great. Cheryl, are you still there? I think we lost you for a second. You might be coming back in. But in the meantime, as we wrap things up, Damon, how do people get involved? How can people listening in further engage with your organization?
I mean, one, contact me. I mean, my email address is on the website. So, but I mean, we always tell people, like I was saying earlier, we look at involvement. We look at everything across the board. So I'm like, if you want to get involved in our organization and you want to do it at a small scale and you don't have that much time and you want to donate, go ahead. You want to donate your time, that's also valuable. If you want to work on a bigger project that might, require a couple of months, like let's sit down and have some meetings. If you have young folks that are interested in the program and they want to, apply, you can look at our Twitter page. It's pinned at the top. There's an application form you can go to as well. So we tend to be really open. Like, we understand that our community is our students, the communities that we serve, and the video game industry, and parents. So we want to be able to talk to everybody and ask them, like, how do we work together to create the best experience for our young folks? And so that can start with things that we already do, or it can start with something that's new, and we're open to those conversations. So that's kind of generally how I tell people if they want to get involved.
So everyone should go to their website. Cheryl, in 30 seconds, how do people get involved in Echoing Green? And then, on that last question, how are you pulling in other investors? And then we'll have Gwyneth, if you want to provide some final remarks, and then I think Olivia is going to come back in. So Cheryl.
Yeah, look, I mean, this access to capital issue is real. We have been telling the sector that we've been de-risking, and I dislike that term because it again is pejorative in a way that it should not be for these amazing innovators. But we've tried our best to de-risk these extraordinary leaders. The sector has not been as responsive because there's not enough equity in the system. So part of our response is to build the collaborative fund, like the Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund, where we get anchor partners like Comcast, who have been leaders on this, sitting around at the table, working together collaboratively and sending signals to the rest of the field that this is the way we've got to work together. I would say stay tuned. Part of the work we're doing, and Comcast has been a lead on this, is to move further downstream and say we're so good at the vetting and sourcing. We assume that there would be frictionless handoff to later stage funders because we're so good at spotting this talent. Hasn't shown up that way. So we have now created a tranche of funding up to $12 million over the next couple of years. So we can go back to Damon, who says, I got a growth plan, I'm ready to go. Can you help me, without sort of all of the hoops that he says he has to jump through to these foundations and others when he shouldn't have to, because he's been pre-vetted, pre-qualified, all that kind of stuff. And then the last thing is we're starting to recognize we're going to have to work with our innovators like Damon to build new capital tools, sort of a Swiss Army knife approach. And maybe they need debt. Maybe they need philanthropic capital. Maybe they need equity investments. Maybe we need to help them think about new approaches to building their businesses. And we're just not going to wait. We're just going to have to do it. So, check out the Echoing Green website, echoinggreen.org. We're going to select our next class of fellows in April. Some more extraordinary leaders coming, but would love to have more folks at the table because we've got to do this together. This is our version of collective impact. We're never going to figure it out on our own. So,
Gwyneth, final remarks, and then while you're doing that, we'll bring in Olivia.
That sounds great. And I think I would just say that this is work that we all have to do together, right? I'm super proud to be part of a company that's not only has a longstanding commitment to communities, but has really, I think, stepped up in some big ways to meet this moment, but also to deepen our commitment. And I think I think that's going to be really critical, that this is not just about meeting a moment, but it's about continued and deepened engagement. And so would encourage everyone that's joined us today to continue to invest in and to support underrepresented leaders. It's not just good for the individual businesses and organizations like Echoing Green and Gameheads, but it's really essential for our communities. So thank you for having us today. Please, everybody, go watch the documentary and check out Echoing Green and Gameheads, incredible organizations. And thank you to Cheryl and Damon for your extraordinary leadership.
Thank you to all. Olivia?
Yes, I am so excited for this documentary. And this was one of the most wonderful conversations and refreshing conversations I've heard in a very long time. What an incredible way to start our 2022 season of events, particularly because Comcast NBCUniversal is such a special partner of ours. So thank you so much, Gwyneth, to you and your team for making this possible. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Damon. This is incredible. So I wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day. And don't forget to sign up for June 7th through the 8th. We will see you all in Washington, D.C. More to come on that. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Have a great rest of the afternoon.